Pretty awesome, and I absolutely recommend it to you. So what's it talking about? Grace for grace comes from John chapter 1 verse 16. We all know the famous John 3:16. Just back up a couple of chapters. And in there you've got John the Baptist speaking, and it's a quote where John the Revelator, or John the Apostle, is writing what John the Baptist said. And he said that we receive the fullness of Christ, grace for grace. It's interesting to look at the Greek, and I don't speak Greek, but just using the lexicons, you can see that grace, in exchange for grace, is what was taught. And Jesus said that John the Baptist was the greatest prophet that had ever lived at that point. Obviously, Jesus was much greater. So grace for grace, or as the Greek says, grace in exchange for grace, is something that Jesus taught throughout his life, because he never mentioned the word grace himself in Matthew, Mark, Luke, or John. It's something that we apply afterwards. But Jesus taught the principle. So I wanted to give you a couple of examples just to explain why it's called Grace for Grace and some of the things that you can expect when you read the book. So the first example would be the parable of the sheep and the goats. I've never liked that name of the title, but that's what it is. It's when Jesus divides the sheep and the goats, and the sheep he allows into the kingdom, and they're really surprised that he's allowed them into the kingdom. And he says, well, I was naked and you clothed me, I was hungry and you fed me. They said, Lord, when saw we thee naked or hungry? And he said, inasmuch as you've done it to the least of these, my brethren, you've done it unto me. So here, the Lord shows them grace because they showed grace to their fellow man. Remember that Jesus always taught the second greatest commandment, which was to love your neighbour as yourself. But then at the end of his life, just before he went to do the atonement in Gethsemane and on the cross, he said that we should love one another as I have loved you. So that's the element of grace that Jesus taught, and he gave us these parables to help us understand what it means. My favourite example is Matthew 18. Well, it's not really a favourite thing because it's kind of a sad thing, but it's a dramatic example, where the king finds a servant who owes him an unpayable amount of money, and the king forgives him. But then the same servant doesn't forgive somebody a very small relative amount of money. And the king finds out and restores that full debt back to the person. And at the end of Matthew 18, it says that, so shall your Father do to you if you don't forgive people. So it's the idea that we're supposed to receive grace because we can't get to heaven without the grace of Jesus Christ. But when we receive it, we're also supposed to mirror that grace, to give it to other people. So that's the idea behind grace for grace. In the book, I talk about where the idea of works came from, and what is this works thing that we're not supposed to have to do. It goes through the law of Moses and how that became the law of works, and how it's a separate thing to the Ten Commandments, because Jesus obviously taught the Ten Commandments and taught the higher version of the Ten Commandments as well, which was not just don't kill, but to not be angry with your brother. So that's the concepts of grace for grace. The other idea that's on the front of the book, which is this lovely tree of life that Franz drew. And the tree of life is a big part of what's going to happen at the very end, because it happened at the very beginning. So when Christ comes down with his Father in heaven, and they come in the city of New Jerusalem at the end of the book of Revelation, chapter 21 and 22, it says that the tree of life will be before the throne. And those who keep the commandments, or those who have washed their garments in the blood of the Saviour and put on the white linen, which we're told is the righteousness of the saints, it says those who have followed Christ and done the things that he's asked them to do, or borne fruit, they'll have the right to enter into that kingdom, and they'll be able to partake of the fruit of the tree of life. So there's a really special parable at the end called the little olive tree, and I would love for you to read that. But it kind of encapsulates the whole book, especially part 2, because it comes in 2 parts. The first one deals with Christ and who he is and what he did for us and what is grace and what is works. And then the second part is the pathway, or the way back to the tree of life. And it's fascinating that Jesus used the term the way, I am the way, in the same way that he said, I will set cherubim and a flaming sword to guard the way to the tree of life. And at the very end, after Judgment Day, when we're worthy, we can, worthy through the blood of the Lamb, and by following the Lamb, we can follow him back to the tree of life, and we can partake of that fruit. So There's an alpha side of the book, which is like the alpha course, but like on steroids. And then there's the omega side, like what we're supposed to do, the next step guides for Christians. So thank you for watching this snapshot. I hope you enjoy it. I hope that you can share. People always talk about sharing social media things, but it really does mean everything to get the word out and to look at this, because it's meant so much to me. I've learned so much. I'm not the same person I was when I started reading it or when I started writing the book. And I hope that it can really produce a wonderful change in yourself, because it's all about change. It's all about growth, and it's about following Christ. I hope you enjoy it.